Who needs a big year? Which assistant, which coach, which coordinator is going to need a big year for the Oklahoma Sooners to contend in 2025? We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Again, thanks for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there tuning in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. If you got a question for a future mailbag episode, make sure you just hit mailbag in big bold letters across the top and then ask your question, whether it's on YouTube or on social media. Tag us, send us a DM, whatever it is. So Jay, you pose this question here, but I'm curious to your answer first. Which coach on Oklahoma's staff needs the biggest year for Oklahoma to contend?
So, of course, the obvious answer is going to be that one position that everybody has been having their questions and actually been wanting a change to happen at, but that's not the one that I thought. For me, the one that really needs to have the biggest year, I think it's going to be Jay Valai in the cornerback room. And I say that because we know that the linebacker room is going to still be pretty stout. We only lost Danny Stutzman, thank goodness. And that's a big loss because Danny's a very good ball hawk when it comes to finding stuff in the run. But the pass game was where Danny was still needing to work out. And that was the one thing that, scouts even said in his weaknesses is he needs to get better when it comes to coverage, which he will. That's something I know that he'll figure out in time, especially as he goes pro. But that cornerback room is going to have to stop big plays and find ways to continue to be able to jump routes, get interceptions, get knockdowns, and really be able to play against some of the elite wide receivers here in the SEC. You're going to have to be able to find a way to make life hard for Ryan Williams, make life hard for Cam Coleman. So to me, Jay Valai, now that he really doesn't have any transfers, because his first couple of years, it was all transfer corners. We had a lot of transfer corners and a couple of young guys that we were grooming, like a Gentry Williams who was dealing with injuries or whatnot, but you had CJ Colden, you had Kanai Walker, right? You had these transfer, Dez Malone, you've had these transfer guys in, but now it's his guys. You got Eli Bowen, right? You've got Jeremiah Newcomb. You've got Malik Hawkins coming in, Cortland Guillory. You've got all the guys that you recruited in. And now we've got to see if they can produce. Jacoby Johnson, have they grown up underneath your tutelage? I feel like that to me is the one room that's not talked about as much, but it's the one that's going to need to have a huge year next season for us to feel really comfortable.
I'm going to go with the offensive line. I have trust in Bill Bedenbaugh. And at the same time, the offensive line wasn't good enough in 2024. That's a reality. It wasn't a good run blocking unit in the first 6-7 games of the season, and it wasn't a really good pass protecting unit for much of the season. Now they dealt with a ton of injuries, and some of those portal additions didn't necessarily pan out for one reason or another, whether it was injuries, whether it was just not being good enough. But when he had to go to the well and he had to rely upon his young guys, those guys weren't quite ready yet either. And so I need my developing offensive line coach, the guy who is lauded by NFL people, scouts, front office people, college football people across the country as being one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. I need him to get this offensive line unit in a much better space going into 2025. The Alabama game showed that, hey, they've got it in them to go and be a dominant unit. Now they got to take that and they got to build that out over a whole season, because when you face Michigan in week 2, you're going to be challenged. That is going to be a tough test, both from the run game perspective and in pass protection. You're not going to get anything easy out of them. When you face Auburn, that's going to be tough as well. And we know what it's going to be like when you face Texas and Ole Miss and South Carolina. And when you face Alabama later in the season, I mean, you're Tennessee, like there are no off weeks once you get into SEC schedule. And so that unit's going to have to be much, much better. If Oklahoma wants to contend for a playoff spot, they've got to have a good to great offensive line to get them there.
No, I 100% agree. That's definitely another spot to really look at. And Bill Bedenbaugh, in time, he has done a really good job of giving you that. In his career, he's had his moments where you've had a down year and then come back with a bounce back year of a big time play from the offensive line. And so I anticipate the line to be much better as long as it's healthier. I think that's the key thing, right? Health is the most critical thing for this entire team. We went through a year where we was fully snake bitten, and it was probably one of the most depressing game seasons that we've seen here at Oklahoma with all the injuries. And it wasn't the situation where people just was terrible. It was you're playing a bunch of kids. And the one conference you don't want to be trying to figure it out in is the SEC. And those guys were going right after them, especially because most of them weren't even healthy. The ones that were still playing still weren't fully healthy. So as long as we can get out there, and I think Troy Everett's going to lead the way. But I agree with you. Bill Bedenbaugh's going to have to show us that he still got it in him. Now, I mean, he did a good job of bringing in some good tackles. We're going to always talk about how great those two tackles are there. The bigger question's going to be, though, is can he get that interior going, get everybody comfortable, and then have like a stable of guys that you can keep rotating in as the game goes on. We got to get out of, luckily, the Derek Simmons pickup we talked about recently was really good. And I think that he'll play some. He may not have to play a lot, but he could be the game breaker. He could be the one that ends up jumping out being a big time contributor to this line. I expect Fabetu to have in year 2 a McKay Matauer year, and he's going to show out and get everybody excited. So no, I think that's very fair to say against Bill Bedenbaugh. Brent Venables is going to have to show us that the staff that he has can really put it all together.
And all the pressure is going to be on Ben Arbuckle. Like if there's like a high level assistant that needs to have a great year, it's Ben Arbuckle. The offense has to be better. You cannot go through another season where you're not averaging 30 plus points a game. You're at Oklahoma. The expectation is you're pushing 35 to 40 points per game, whether you're in the SEC or not. You're expected to go out there and score points, run up yards, and put the pressure on other teams to try to keep up. That's what you're expected to do at Oklahoma. And when you have a defense like Oklahoma has, you're going to have an opportunity to get the ball quite a bit. It's going to be up to you to do something with it. So if it all comes together, I think they'll have a really strong season. But there's a lot of questions. And I think if we learned anything from 2024, it's that you've got to make sure everybody on your depth chart is ready to go.
Yep.
You cannot go into fall camp saying, hey, you know what? We're not going to be relying on Michael Fasusi and Ryan Foje this season. We're just going to redshirt them. We don't have to sweat whether they know the game plan, whether they know the playbook, whether they're up and ready to go physically. No, we've got to have every single person on the depth chart ready to go from day one, because you don't know what you're going to run into. You don't know that you're not going to need a Zion Raggins or an Ivan Carrion to play significant snaps for you during the regular season like you did in 2024. Or extrapolate that out to a 2025 guy, Elijah Thomas.
Ooh, I expect a lot out of him.
Or a Manny Choice. Like, you've got to have those guys ready to go. Or if you're looking at the offensive line, a Owen Hollenbeck. Say Troy Everett suffers another injury and you've got to go into the well at center. Josh Isosa, Owen Hollenbeck, you've got to be ready to go. Afalava, you've got to be ready to go. Nobody can sit back and be like, no, I'm redshirting this year. I can just take it easy. No, everybody from the number 1 guy on the roster to number 105 on the roster, everybody's got to be ready to contribute. And that's going to be on the coaching staff to make sure everybody's physically, mentally prepared to do that. Because so much of what happened in 2024 is that guys were not physically and mentally prepared because they weren't expected to be relied upon this year.
Yeah, and it was especially true because we had that the 24 offensive line recruiting class was so young, right? You brought in 5 offensive linemen, you brought in some additional transfers in hopes to bolster some things up, and you actually was hoping that you get one more to show up, and he decided not to, but instead the one that came, Hatchet, decided to go back home with his little brother instead of both of them coming down into town. And so you dealt with a lot. You played Logan Howland a lot earlier than you wanted to. Logan's supposed to play this year, not last year, and he ended up playing this year. Heath Ozaida got to play more than he probably anticipated because of injuries. And so if you would have had more health, line would have been just fine. But you did end up playing a lot of the redshirt freshmen that you didn't think you were going to play. Now those guys are going to have to be prepared to step up. But luckily, you're playing a lot more veteran bodies who have actually had at least one full year of getting beat up in the SEC, and now they know what to do to prepare themselves.
Yep. And it's time for Brent Venables to put it all together. Year 4, injuries, no injuries. It's time to show that, hey, you've got this head coaching thing down and you're not going to run into some of the management mistakes that we've seen creep up and become an issue for this team since you've been in Oklahoma. That is on you. Brent Venables, you got to be at your best this year. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts for free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Follow Jay at Unfair Sports. Go check out his channel over on YouTube, covering all the college football over at Unfair Sports. Follow me at John 9 Williams. You can read my work covering the Sooners over at SoonersWire.com. The show is at Locked On Sooners on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Threads, Pinterest, all of the social media platforms. Pinterest is out there. That's for the ladies as they're trying to scroll their Oklahoma fashions and figure out how to decorate their house for game day. They can also check out some of our shorts and reels over there on Pinterest. So that's what that's there for. But until next time, he's Jay Smith. I'm John Williams, where we'll continue to break down Oklahoma offseason, get you ready for spring ball all offseason, and we'll talk recruiting and more here on Locked On Sooners. But until next time, Boomer!
Sooner.